Hi to your Patreon. Shout out to you, Scott. You're the man. Welcome back to another book review, guys. This is going to be Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, the first standalone that I have read and reviewed for the channel. I have also read Elantris. We're not going to talk about that. So Warbreaker, of course, if you don't already know, is part of the Cosmere. It is currently a standalone with a sequel scheduled for 2024, 2025-ish, maybe? It's going to be called Nightblood, which is basically named after one of the swords in this world. But when I looked it up, it looks like it's going to come after Mistborn Era 3, Stormlight 5, and whatever he finishes with Elantris. So either, I guess we're getting an entire Era 3 and one or two more Elantris books before this book is written, but there will be a sequel eventually. And as far as I understand it, as far as like the chronological aspect of where this takes place in the Cosmere, it is after Elantris in Era 1, but before Era 2, obviously, because that comes much later. I think that's even after Stormlight. So just if you want to know where it's at in the Cosmere. So this story follows two sisters. So they are Ciri, the younger sister, and Vivenna, who is the older sister. Now, Ciri is very much kind of the anti-princess. She is not really one to be very royal or buy into the whole like princess to become a queen kind of thing, whereas Vivenna has been essentially groomed and trained her entire life to lead and be a princess, and is supposed to marry the God King in this world. Now, the beginning of the book is built up to show you that these two sisters exist. This is, Vivenna's plan is to go marry the God King, and then for some reason Ciri ends up getting sent instead in Vivenna's place to marry the God King, and Vivenna is obviously confused. So for the most part in this book, you follow Ciri, and then you eventually follow Vivenna a little bit later on. But Ciri is kind of at the forefront for at least the first half or so of the book, with Vivenna playing more of a background role, but then they both are very forward later on in the book. But Ciri's story obviously follows her going to become the wife of the God King. Now, the God King is what is known as a returned. So in this world, and it says it on the back of the book, basically, if you die kind of like a heroic death in this world, you are essentially brought back to life as what is known as a returned. So you're not really human, and you're immortal at that point. And you are effectively a god, and people worship you. And there's different religions that serve different gods. So all these various gods are returned. They feed off of what are called breaths in this world, which is part of the magic system. Now, breaths in the world operate on basically sucking colors out of things. So it's called a biochromatic aura. And every person in this world has one breath. Now, you can give your breath away, and that is typically what these people are doing that serve these different returned gods, is they're offering their breaths in return to hopefully get some kind of favor or, blessing, things like that. So once people give away their breath, so they're what's called dregs, which is they're colorless almost, like you can't sense them as you would somebody that still has their breath. And breath is very valuable in this world. So when somebody dies, like certain people are stronger than others, so they carry more breaths, or they've collected more breaths in their lifetime. So they're valuable if somebody dies, because you can basically pass your breath on to somebody else. Through a process which is called an awakening. It's explained that some of these gods actually require to get a breath a day to stay alive. So people are constantly giving their breaths to these gods because they worship them and they are their deities, essentially. Now, the main other point to the breath and color magic system here, because this entire book has a lot to do with colors. You'll see people's hair changing colors when they're nervous or angry. You'll see people drawing colors out of various objects because they are using their breath to basically perform this action. You can use your breath on an inanimate object to actually make it come to life, essentially. You can also use this breath to kind of make things radiate different colors. One of the examples in this is several times one of our characters will kind of either get nervous or frightened in a scene, and their hair will turn white. So the entire thing kind of just plays off of colors. The entire world kind of revolves around this biochromatic magic, and it's super interesting and creative. This as a standalone story was great. It was a hell of a lot of fun. You have the exact same Brandon Sanderson style of writing, And the typical Sanderson pacing is there. The world building is outstanding, and I actually want to read a quote from the back of the book. I don't actually know who wrote this, but I completely agree with this quote, where it says, Brandon Sanderson proves again that he is a master of what Tolkien called secondary creation, the invention of whole worlds complete with magics and myths all their own. Now, the reason I totally agree with that is because think for a second everything that Sanderson has written, whether it was Elantris, Mistborn Era 1 or 2, the Stormlight Archive, Emperor's Soul, Warbreaker, Edge Dancer, the guy is so good at just creating atmosphere and world that it is astonishing to me. Even the books that I didn't like as much, which were Elantris and Era 2 and Secret History, he knows what he's doing. Like, it didn't vibe with me, but just the sheer amount of language and magic systems and atmosphere and characters and just everything that he does to these various worlds, like each of these have to do with and revolve around human characters, but everything else is so alien and creative that it's truly amazing that one, he writes so damn fast, two, he writes so many books, and three, most of them kick a lot of ass. And in Warbreaker, again, like, there's not a lot of action in this book, so it's definitely not Mistborn. This is not an action-packed story. There is very little action, honestly, but when it does appear, it's done very well, of course, because the guy can always write a great action scene. But this really focuses on the world building, the atmosphere, the magic, and the characters. The characters in this book are some of his best that I've read outside of the Stormlight Archive. And then, of course, I have some favorites from Mistborn, but they're not his best characters. There's a few of them that are awesome. But Ciri and Vivenna are both strong female protagonists. Sanderson seems to be very good at writing strong female protagonists, so points to him for that. This book also has a lot of great sort of secondary characters, not completely side characters, but the God King ends up being a very interesting character, super dynamic. Some of the other returned gods as well, such as Lightsong and Blushweaver. Lightsong is probably one of my favorite characters from this book. He is completely hilarious. Every time he is on a page, I was at least giggling, if not laughing, because the I don't know, the writing is just so good, and he's kind of Lightsong is one of these characters where something else that these returned, they're not allowed to, I guess, know what their previous life was, because the priests just want them to serve as these gods. And Lightsong kind of goes against the grain with that, and he's constantly making jokes and trying to figure out like what he used to be as a human before he died and came back. But he's just always, he's kind of like a lazy god. He doesn't feel like he deserves to be worshipped or be a god, and the priests follow him around like, don't say that, my lord. And he's just like, look, I don't want to be this, like, this isn't me. So he's always funny when he's on the page. You have other really interesting characters such as Vasher and his talking sword Nightblood. Nightblood is one of the funniest characters in this book too. A talking sword, go figure. There's some secondary characters, these mercenaries, Tonk, Fa, and Denth. Their back and forth dynamic and banter is absolutely hilarious. Just, this was one of the funnier Sanderson books that I've read. Probably, honestly, the funniest. I've heard Words of Radiance has a lot of humor too. I'm about to get into it. But this book was a lot of fun and very entertaining and just funny throughout, and that was surprising. So, of course, very interesting characters. World building was top notch. The goofy ass Sanderson swears are here, and go figure, the book revolving around colors, they use colors as a swear. So people are constantly saying colors, 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 Lord of Colors, which, look, I'm gonna have to just deal with it. Like, Sanderson does this in all of his books. He's gonna have some goofy swears. You're either gonna love it or hate it. I just think it's funny. It didn't really bother me in this. I have to laugh at it because it's goofy. Overall, the story was very interesting, following these two sisters, and their sort of quests in this book are awesome. I really want to see more from them. And if I had to really knock this book in any place, it would be the ending, simply because it seems like it wraps up a little bit too quick, and just the way that it wraps up, it's almost as if he was already, which I mean makes sense. There is a sequel coming. It seems like he didn't want to completely finish a part of the story here and save it for another book. So I don't know if this is going to be a duology or a trilogy, but it definitely reads towards the end as, okay, let's get this wrapped up, save something for the next book. So I mean, it's a minor gripe. It doesn't really detract too much from the book, but it does seem like there's a little bit left out at the end. One point I want to make about the writing is this. I mean, this kind of goes for every Sanderson story. If you're familiar with his writing, you know that if you read slowly and try to actually absorb what he's saying and pay attention to minor details, there is a ton of foreshadowing in everything that he writes. The first time when I read through Mistborn, I was not ignoring, but kind of breezing past like the little excerpts, like the italicized text at the beginning of each chapter, or in like Stormlight, you have the interludes. Don't skip any of that and really pay attention to things that are happening. People will do things in these books, especially Warbreaker, where sometimes a character will say something and it seems like, oh, that's too obvious. That can't actually be what's happening. And then he throws you off the trail and then it does happen, or he'll like, he's so good at faking you out when he wants to, or like faking you out if he wants to. I'm not explaining it very well, but he's very good at whatever kind of plot twist or foreshadowing or breadcrumbs that he wants to leave. He's just so good at doing it, and it always pays off. And there were moments in this book where I was just floored by his ability to do this, and it made the book that much more entertaining. And you can just, the more I read of the guy as these stories progress, you can really tell that his writing just got so much better. And he's just one of the things that I've always thought in any of these books that he's just fantastic at is leaving those little breadcrumbs of foreshadowing. And it's probably something you're not going to notice until you go back and reread any of these books, where it's like, oh my God, like he was foreshadowing this 18 chapters ago. But he does that really, really well, especially in Warbreaker. So just pay attention to the words on the page, because you will find little nuggets here and there that will pay off later. And it's so cool when you do notice one of those, and then later on it comes back around and you're like, oh yeah, that is what he was talking about. So I love that about Sanderson's writing. But that is going to do it for Warbreaker. It was a fantastic standalone that will have a sequel in 4 to 5 years. Highly recommend it. Definitely go read this one. It is a small Sanderson book, so it's 650 pages. But it's good, and I'm glad I read it. I'm going to get towards the Radiance now, because that was my plan. I snuck Warbreaker into my TBR this month because several people told me that I needed to read this before Words of Radiance, because there will be payoff in that book from this book, so I stuck this in. That probably means I won't get to Lord of Chaos this month, but that's okay. I'll get back to the Wheel of Time soon. So I liked it. Go read it. It's great. It's Sanderson. If you're already on board for his books, you're going to like it. So go read it. And of course, if you are liking the content, enjoying the channel, please like and subscribe. Hit the bell notification so you are reminded of when I upload videos. And then, of course, the Discord is growing, so please join us in there if you want any other conversations with me about books, whatever you want to talk about. We're having a lot of great conversations in that as well. And I do have a Patreon as well, so thank you to all my patrons. Love you guys. But that's going to do it for this one. So until next time, keep reading.